Okay, I'm back. Chapter 13. So let's review it a little bit. In chapter 11, we talked about perfectly competitive market structures, right? Which is exactly what it sounds. Perfect competition. And you'll recall some of the attributes, many firms selling almost identical products, etc. Okay? And then in chapter 12, we kind of talked about the other extreme, especially when it comes to competitiveness, right? We talked about monopoly. And again, kind of the other extreme in the sense that it's the least competitive. This is the most competitive. This is the least competitive. One firm dominates the entire market. No competitors, unique product, et cetera, et cetera. And then now we're in chapter 13. We're going to talk about sort of the two intervening market structures, okay? Because there's a total of four, and going from left to right, perfectly competitive again is the most competitive, but there's another market structure called monopolistically competitive, and it is also a competitive market structure, right? It has the word competitive, right? But it has this weird modifier, this word descriptor or adjective, monopolistically competitive. What's that all about? Well, we'll talk about it. And then the fourth and final one is oligopoly. Which again is not a competitive market structure. Okay, it's a market structure in which the market is dominated by a few dominant firms. So let's talk about these two sort of intermediate market structures, and I'll just give you the punchline to the joke. This is not a very common market structure. In fact, it's probably the least common out of all four. All right, this is not a common market structure. These two are common market structures. In fact, most firms operate in a monopolistically competitive market structure. Okay, so let's figure this out. Now, this is a kind of simplified version of what happens real world, but it's important for firms to understand the market structure in which they operate, right? And so, let's say a firm comes to your consulting firm. Business and says, hey, look, I need help kind of figuring out the market structure I'm in. You studied economics, you're an economist, you studied economics with Mr. Dixon, you're obviously very smart, very wise, so help me out, help me figure this out, okay? All right, so the first question you as the consultant would ask this firm is like, okay, so do you set your own price? Because if the answer is no, I don't set my own price, I take the market price, the price that is dictated by the market. Well, that's easy. That firm operates in what? A perfectly competitive market structure, because it's the only market structure in which the firm doesn't set their own price. So most of the time, the answer is going to be, yep, I set my own price. Okay, so we can cross off competitive market structure. That doesn't apply. The next question is, do you have competitors? Because if the answer is, no, I don't really have any competitors, again, it's easy. That firm operates in a monopoly market structure, right? But again, it's not a very common answer. Most of the time the answer is, yeah, I have competitors. Okay, so we can cross off monopoly. That doesn't apply. So now we're down to the two remaining market structures. So now the question is, what is your concentration ratio, or HHI, right? HHI stands for, I'm looking it up here because it's just, I can never remember. It's a Herfindahl-Hirschman index. A couple of economists, if ever you wanted an economist named Smith and Jones, it would have been easier to call it the Smith and Jones index. But the HHI, what these two things do is they measure concentration in a market and how consolidated and how much market share basically is dominated by what number of firms, okay? And so again, I'll just kind of give you the punchline to the joke. When it comes to concentration ratio, generally speaking, I mean, this isn't hard and fast, okay? But you look at a few firms. Usually it's the top 4 firms, but I've seen it as much as 8. And what you do is you look at the top, let's say 4 to 8 firms, and the examples I'm going to use, I'm going to stick with a four firm concentration ratio. And you look at the market share of those 4 firms. And the threshold is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 60%. So if the top 4 firms in a market control 60% or more of the market share, that is said to be a concentrated market. Okay, meaning, this is the pie. This is all of the revenue. So you have $1 trillion worth of revenue, and there's whatever that is, 25 firms, each with 4% of the market share. Then the top 4 firms. So top 4 firms, roughly, what I say, 4% of the market share. 4 times 4 it's about 16%. So that's not very concentrated. In other words, there's plenty of competition. There's no dominant firms that sort of control that market. Okay, but let's say the top 4 firms controlled 25, 20, 20, we'll just make it easy. Top 4 firms each have 20% of the market share, and this remaining slice, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 80%, and the remaining 20% of the market is dominated or is controlled by, let's say, 56 firms, right? If those top 4 firms each have 20%, they dominate that market, and it is said to be concentrated. Okay. Now the HHI is just an index, and again, you can go through in the chapter and read about it. It's basically the sum of the squares of the market share, yada yada yada. Here's what I care about. As an index, it's just a number, so you just need to know what the context is. And with an HHI, once an HHI hits about 1800, that range starts getting attention primarily from the government, because it's said to be a fairly concentrated market. If the HHI is over 2500, it definitely gets the attention of the government. Now, let's go back to our little scenario. So, hey, do you set your own price? Yeah, I set my own price. All right, not perfectly competitive. Do you have competitors? You have competitors. Okay, not a monopoly. Now, we look at this. If you come to me and say, yeah, my concentration ratio is about 75 and my HHI is about 2600, what that tells me is your firm operates in an oligopoly, right? An oligopoly is a market structure dominated by a few firms, right? If you come to me and say, yeah, my concentration ratio is 16% and the HHI is 1,000, then that's not a concentrated market structure, and that would be indicative of a monopolistically competitive market structure. So let's start out with monopolistically competitive market structure. Well, actually, we're talking about concentration ratio, so let's stick with oligopolies, okay? So we have we do the test. We have a concentration ratio that's over 60%. We have an HHI that's, say, over 2,500%. So we definitely operate within an oligopoly. Okay, so let's talk about the attributes then of an oligopoly. An oligopoly is a market structure in which, let's go down to the key here. All right, the key, firms. all right? There's just a few firms that dominate. It's important to understand here there may be hundreds, if not thousands, of firms in the market. But that market, even though it maybe has 1,000 firms in it, is dominated by just a few firms. Now, let's do the easy one. What are the goal of those firms? To maximize profit. Notice how that's not changing? It won't. What's the rule for understanding maximizing profit? Well, where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. In the short run, what kind of profit structure can a firm in an oligopoly earn? Well, in the short run, on any given day, any of the four, may apply. So they may be shut down, they may be operating a loss, they may be operating economic profit, zero economic profit. It doesn't matter in the short run on any given day. In the long run, though, what does an oligopoly and again, it has to do with the barriers. Okay, so again, when it comes to sorry, I'm just looking at something real quick here. When it comes to long run profit, that has everything to do with barriers. Okay, so in an oligopoly, there are some barriers. So long run profit depends. And again, it's sort of the answer I gave you before. To the degree that they can maintain barriers, then firms in an oligopoly can, in fact, enjoy economic profit in the long run. To the extent that they cannot maintain barriers, then it looks more like a competitive market structure in which that's competed down to zero. Okay, same answer here, right? Marginal revenue is going to be less than price for the exact same reasons we talked about before. In fact, I should tell you, the graphs don't change, right? The graph for the monopoly graph that we talked about before is going to be exactly the same for oligopolies and for monopolistically competitive market structures because, among other things, the price in all three are set by the firm. Okay, so I'm not going to show you anything new on graphs, and in fact, for oligopolies, we're not even going to really look at that graph again. We'll look at something else. Okay, product. Now the product is again kind of interesting because it depends. In some oligopolies, the products are trend towards unique. In other ones, they trend towards more interchangeable or commodity, kind of like a perfectly competitive market structure. And let me give you an example of kind of what I'm talking about, right? And then sometimes differentiation, is a big player. But one of the firms or markets that's very definitely an oligopoly is brewing, right? Brewing is dominated by a few big firms. And again, beer ranges from very distinctive and unique and differentiated to, very sort of almost common and, commodity driven in terms of interchangeable. So, that really depends. Efficient, no, for the same reason, because there's deadweight loss that's in the market. And yes, they can price discriminate for oligopoly. And then the key, now this is important. The key with oligopolies, right? The key meaning the thing that exists in this market that doesn't exist in any other market is the strategic or interdependent behavior of those few dominant firms. Okay, and that's very, very important. And what we're going to do now, I'm going to end this video and come right back, and we're going to talk about a couple of different models of oligopoly that show us or speak to that strategic or interdependent behavior. Okay?